We covered a lot of areas in this podcast, in this Celebrating Menopause series. Like, I really do want to embrace the time before, during, and after menopause and empower all of you with real life stories and our journeys personally to share with you, as you often share with me, certainly as my patients do in my office, but also people I've never met from my online audience will share their transition stories, their menopause story, or what they're dealing with, or having trouble with, their challenges in their life, as well as their celebration. So I honor that. I honor this piece, this journey, this experience, and also the vulnerability. I figure the more we can talk about this to each other, the more we can talk about it to other people, and we take away shame and we take away delaying taking action to improve the qualities of our lives and the quality of our relationship. So, in this one, we did talk about parenting and transition to independence. We talked about empty nest and personal growth, as well as menopause health and our, what's next? What's next in our life? And I think it's so important to really educate on the area of menopause, continue to promote health and wellness, and cultivate your personal interest for when you are empty nesting to be able to take the journey to a whole new level. Cynthia, isn't it just amazing how many hours of our life we get back when all our children are driving on their own?
It is life changing. It's that bittersweet push pull of parenting where I've loved every stage of being a parent, but there are things that I didn't appreciate enough when my boys were younger that I do now, that I look back and I'm like, all those furious days of I was still working as an NP in a traditional setting. I was racing home to grab one kiddo to take them to an activity. And it was like between 3 o'clock and 8, it was a constant flurry of activities and errands and making dinner and getting baths and getting them in bed. And I don't believe in wishing anything about parenting away, but I sometimes wish I could go back and just feel the frenetic energy of those years and just take it to heart, realizing like in little small pieces, as your children are becoming more independent, they pull away. And that's the natural progression. That should be the way things happen. But I think for a lot of people, they lose sight of that. And before they know it, their kids have left. And it's an
Mhm.
enormous void because they should be the large focus of our lives when you are growing and maturing a human being into an independent, strong adult. But there is nothing harder. And I say this as someone who just dropped off their oldest at college last week. There is nothing harder than giving them a hug and sending them on their way and knowing they are completely ready to be making all of those beautiful changes, but realizing how much our lives change in the process. Like my husband and I were talking about that last night. We just have one at home now, and he's driving and very fiercely independent. And I always look at the dogs. I'm like, well, at least the dogs are excited to see us. That the teenager is occasionally excited to see us. It depends on his mood. But I think it just makes you realize how fleeting time is as a parent. And with the understanding that we have done our jobs well. Like we have this strong, independent, smart young man who's making good decisions and navigating college and having fun. And we just get to sit back and be coaches. Like I was explaining to Jack before I took him to college, and I really took a month off from my business and really focused on him. And especially the last 2 weeks, because I had one kiddo at a program at Oxford. And so it was just Jack and my husband and I. And I said to him, hey, buddy, I want you to know that our relationship is starting to shift, and not in a bad way. Your dad and I are always here for you unconditionally, but I'm moving away from when you're raising kids and you're kind of gently navigating them to I'm playing the coach role.
Right.
I will offer my opinion when you ask for it, but my job is not to helicopter parent you. And what I find really interesting, I don't know if you experience this with your daughters, but I'm in the Facebook group for this amazing university where Jack is. And it's just an incredibly welcoming, warm, wonderful group of people. But I listen to a lot of the conversations and parents are sometimes in many ways, they're projecting their own insecurities. Like they're worried their kid isn't going to make friends. Of course they will. They're worried their kids aren't going to do well in the class. Of course they will. but many of them, it's so clear that they haven't gotten to a point where they're allowing their child to make decisions on their own. Like I didn't helicopter parent over like his dorm selection or his school selection. I let him do. I said, I'm here if you need me, but I think you're completely capable of making these decisions with your friends. And I think he felt a tremendous sense of appreciation for that, because it's like we're respecting the independent individual that they're becoming, as opposed to feeling like we have to, like, of course I want to mother him, that doesn't go
Yeah.
away, but feeling like, that it's clear that, you get this little bit of ebb and flow as a parent is shifting substantially.
You are cutting the umbilical cord all over again. You
Yes,
really are, and you
literally, figuratively.
seriously, it is cutting the umbilical cord, all right, and I've gotta trust, right? I've gotta put this trust on, this boundary of trust on, and it's a challenge. I mean, I think we the worry I always tell my early pregnant patients, like, with that positive pregnancy test, the worry begins, and I don't think it ends
Yes,
till you die, basically,
yes,
so so that's it, but it is cutting the umbilical cord. Now that leaves you, like, you are going through, and we both, I've been through perimenopause and menopause with raising all my girls through their teenage years. I have one teenager at home at 16, which I have to say, when she started driving, I had like, because we go to the ranch every day, that's a good 20 to 24 hours every week at the ranch of my time chauffeuring, driving, and being with her there. So when she started driving on her own, I was like, "Oh my god." So I binged watched Grey's Anatomy. I
good for you.
binge watched Psych. I mean, I'm like, "What am I doing with my time?" So I had to cut myself off, or I actually put a walking pad by the, couch. So if I'm gonna binge watch, I've gotta get on the walking pad for at least a few thousand
Smart.
steps anyway. So, but you have this space now.
Mhm.
There's this transition of space, and there's a hormonal, there's these hormonal shifts that happen when all of a sudden you have space. And neither of us are there because we both have juniors at home. So
Yeah.
we feel this experience, but oftentimes that transition into empty nesting is space. And then what do you do with that space? It's space enough for sometimes for that, like nervous breakdown to occur, right? Because like all of a sudden there's a gap you slow down from the busyness of your life, and there's a gap, there's a shift in hormones. So with every transition, there is a rewiring process that has to occur, just like when we cut that umbilical cord the first time. So what about perimenopause and menopause and the hormonal changes that you've been through during this time, and navigating them, being, a leader in the online influencer space, an author, and all the wonderful things you do, product creator, a wife, and mother of two children?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in many ways it's been this slow kind of shift. I kind of got thrown into menopause probably earlier than I would have gone chronologically because of my hospitalization 5 years ago. And that was 13 days, lost 15 pounds. And I think that just shoved whatever estrogen I had, just pushed me over the cliff. And so, kind of navigating the changing relationships we're having with our children as they're becoming more independent, how that impacts my relationship with my husband, because suddenly we have a whole lot more time to do things together and we don't have to get a babysitter. We don't have to, jump through 15 hoops to make things happen. I think it reinforces why it's so important that we create, cultivate hobbies, things that are of interest to each one of us as we are navigating these changes. Like my husband now golfs like several times a week, and he does taekwondo, and we play pickleball together. And for me, there's been more time to be able to create. So I felt less guilty, taking time to write or work on podcast prep or, speak on stages. And so for me, it's been very freeing, and that I don't feel that sense of guilt that I felt all the time when they were younger.
Mhm.
But it's also, I can share things with them on a different level. Like I can explain to my kids, this is why I'm going to this event. This is why this is important to me. They take an interest in it. But I think it's important for each one of us to identify, prioritize, whether it's a hobby, whether it's taking time to have the opportunity to binge watch. And there's no shame. I mean, I can get on a Hulu or Netflix and enjoy just the kind of idle, passive process of enjoying something just for pure pleasure. But by the same token, ensuring that I continue to make an impact, ensuring that I continue to stimulate my brain. Like I
Mhm.
just picked up a trainer She's a female. She's a little bit older than me. She knows how to train middle-aged women. And it's been such a joy because it's just me and her. And we have these real conversations. We talk about real things. But I think for a lot of individuals, like when I think about how hormone replacement therapy has been so integral in ensuring I sleep, that I'm mentating well, that I'm protecting my bones. We were talking offline about the dry vagina comment that a colleague of ours made that, someone said to her, dry vaginas don't matter. I'll be the first person to say dry vaginas should be avoided at all costs for a number of reasons, not just physically, but psychologically, and all of the unfortunate side effects that can come from the loss of
Quality
vaginal
of life,
protection.
right?
Right. And I think for a lot of people, and I hear women say this, things like sex doesn't matter, I don't need it anymore, I don't care that I don't have a libido. And I always say, sex is like a litmus test. It is one of many things that can clue us in that things are not properly regulated or balanced. And I know many people hate that word hormone balancing, but like, let's be real. I think that it's important for women to prioritize themselves. I think this is a time when we kind of, maybe it's been 20 plus years where we've been disconnected from what we want to do and how we want to navigate our lives. And it really gives us this beautiful opportunity to show up differently. And it could be that you reprioritize connecting with girlfriends. Like the thing that's kind of fun for me is my son's at a big state school. How many of my sorority sisters or friends of mine from college or grad school are sending their kids to the same school? And we were like, oh, when we tailgate, we're going to just be connecting with friendships, people we haven't seen in years who I really loved and spent a lot of time with during my 20s and late teens. And so I think that sense of connection, the oxytocin piece that I know you love to talk about, and it's certainly so important, honoring ourselves and not feeling a sense of guilt for advocating for what we need. That could show up differently in relationships. It could be personal, professional. I know for myself, I lost my dad this summer. And so for me, it's been cultivating, really prioritizing the people I want to spend time with, perhaps creating some boundaries for those I want to spend a little less time with. They may not necessarily be family members, but just kind of reprioritizing things within my life, because we want to think about menopause as the second half of our lives, second, third of our lives. We want it to be joyful. We want it to be enriching. We want it to be stimulating. We want it to be, enwrapped in spending time and doing things that bring us joy. Because ultimately, I always say to my kids, ultimately, I identify as your mom, but I'm also my own individual, and it's important for me to cultivate things that bring me joy. Just like you will find that place in your life in your 20s, 30s, and things kind of get put on pause for a while with younger kids. But understanding like what truly brings you joy in your life. I think that's so, so important.
And I really think it's a gift of menopause, getting out of the high reproductive hormonal swing levels to have actually ability to higher connect with our inner selves and our spirit. And it's so true. And having this ability to one of the things we were talking about is like I felt with my Camino de Santiago that I'm using it partly to celebrate menopause, to demarcate, okay, now I'm in the second 50 of my life, right? So this will be the second 50 or the next 50 of my life. Like, how do I want to live it? Can I celebrate this? Like we've celebrated other rites of passages in lifetime events like puberty or marriages or whatever it may, childbirth or diplomas, graduation. Like we celebrate and demarcate these, but menopause, no one, first of all, like I don't blame y'all if you're listening and you're like, I don't want to talk about menopause anymore. I don't want to hear about it. I mean, first of all, it was named wrong. It should never have been named menopause. I mean, seriously. And then, secondly, like, just want to be through with it and done with it. Like, forget it, right? And to move on, let alone, but to celebrate a transition into the second half of your life. Now, have you like how do you take that sentiment? Like how will you or how have you celebrated the transition of menopause, like to demarcate it in a big way? And part of
Yeah.
that is, one, sending your child off to school, cutting that umbilical cord. That's one way, but what else?
Yeah. I mean, I think for so many of us, it's really figuring out, what kind of mark are you going to leave? I feel like my mother's generation, there was a lot of shame around aging. They didn't want to talk about their age. They didn't, certainly, my mother never talked to me about menopause. My grandmother didn't, none of my aunts. They only tell me things after the fact now. And so I think allowing women to have a voice, to be able to feel comfortable and confident talking about the unique challenges that we experience, dry vaginas aside, the unique challenges that you start to experience as you're losing those hormones, but how important it can be to integrate bringing hormones back into your life so that you have a high quality of life. I think that I agree with you that the terminology around menopause really, it doesn't do us any justice. It's not a pause, although, we can make the argument that it's a pause and then we have this second half of our lives that is certainly very important. But I know for myself, I feel like I've really found my voice. I think that I was a people pleaser my entire life. That's probably why I ended up in healthcare. It's probably why I became a nurse and a nurse practitioner. I'm by nature a caretaker. I'm by nature someone that likes people to feel good when they're around me. But I've also found my voice, and so much of how I communicate now is being very clear about healthy boundaries and making sure people understand that this is acceptable, this is not, and I'm not apologizing for it. And this is where it's been interesting, without disclosing who this family member is, like really helping them understand why it is so important for me that the boundaries I have in that relationship are very much designed to protect me and to ensure that I'm not spending more time than I should with people that don't have ultimately my best interests at heart. So having that voice as a woman and understanding the relationship with estrogen. Estrogen is a people-pleasing hormone. Why do we see young women that oftentimes really cater to everyone? It is the role of estrogen. It's a bonding hormone. It's not a bad hormone by any stretch of the imagination. But as we are losing estrogen, we are losing. That's where women will say, like, I am loud and proud. I have no problems articulating what I want. I think about when I go to the gym, I am going to the gym specifically to train to be strong so that I don't fall and break a hip, so that I don't trip and fall and break my wrist, so that I'm not in a position where I become weak and frail. Because I do have a family member that passed away early this summer, and it was because he had developed frailty and sarcopenia, fell, hit his head, developed a bleed, and unfortunately passed away from that. So when I think about a lot about menopause, it's really finding our voice, articulating the things that we need to have met, and also not being embarrassed to talk about like the weird things that happen, like itchy ears, dry skin, changes in libido, feeling like you don't think as clearly and cohesively. For me, I've always been terrible at names. Like someone will tell me their name and I'll forget it. And I've been that way my entire life. This is not a menopausal thing. But if I start forgetting or not being able to find words, if I'm struggling and I'm feeling like I'm not nearly as articulate, that is going to clue me in that there's something I need to address.
Mhm.
And so this is where I think lifestyle and hormone replacement therapy become critically important for us as women. There's still misinformation out there. And I know this because probably much like you, your team and you are fielding emails, DMs, comments constantly. Hormones cause cancer. Hormones cause breast cancer. And so I think so much of our mission, you and I and others in our field, is really helping women find their voices and be able to say, no, that's actually not correct. Or I need to find the right provider to get the care I deserve to have. Because I can speak for myself. When I was in perimenopause, I didn't have the provider that I needed. I had someone who wanted to put me on synthetic oral
Well,
contraceptives.
let's talk about that a
Yeah,
second. So you go through
yeah.
your you go through your surgery. I mean, you were cycling, you go through that, traumatic event. So this was 5 years ago. You're hospitalized. You have a colostomy bag, right? You had something like that?
I almost did. They
Almost did.
wanted to take my colon and my appendix, and I was like, time out, I need my colon.
Yeah.
So,
Hold on.
but I had a slew of complications. And so during those 13 days, I was not eating for 5 on TPN, which for anyone that's listening, total parenteral nutrition, because my body was starving. I was catabolizing
So
all my
that's
muscle.
IV or,
Yeah,
IV
IV
nutrition.
food. Yeah, it's like I call it the bag of crap, but the bag of crap actually kept me alive. So I always say I'm grateful for that. But I lost so much weight that my body, it was such a shock, whether it's a divorce, an illness, you lose a job, something catastrophic can happen in your mid to late 40s that can push you over that edge. So, for me, I went from having a period before I was hospitalized to never having a period again. And to the credit of that midwife that I was working with at that time in my life, she said, I wish I could tell you this is uncommon. It's not. She was like, I have a lot of women. She was like, we watched your labs last year. We know where you are now. Your FSH is 90.
Yeah.
And I remember just being shocked. I was like, I'm too young. At that time, I was 47. So at 48, I was in full menopause. And I remember saying, like, I was like, I'm too young for this to happen. But I look at it as a gift. It gave me a gift and an opportunity to show up differently. It gave me the opportunity to find this voice that I've always had, but I was maybe not as apt to use as effectively as I do now. And so I always look at it like that hospitalization was a gift. It was a
Mhm.
gift because it forced me to show up differently, personally and professionally, in a way that has changed a lot of lives and for which I'm grateful. And I tell my kids all the time, like, my sole focus when I was in the hospital was getting home to you all. That was my focus. And I got to a point where I said, I don't want you bringing the kids in because it scared them to see
Yeah.
me with tubes and IVs and all sorts of contraptions that were attached to my body to make sure that I got out of the hospital.
Mhm. And so then coming through, like, your body in shock, the perimenopause, menopause symptoms, what did you experience? Did you have the hot flashes, insomnia, when you're like,
Um,
"Hey, now I really know something's wrong?"
yeah, I would say that probably 10 years ago, so early 40s, that's when I noticed my sleep wasn't as good. I had a trouble staying asleep. I started to realize that the intense physical exercise that I'd been doing was no longer serving me. So I was doing conditioning classes that were very intense, kind of like CrossFit. They were no longer serving me. I was probably too low carb. I wasn't, I mean, I hadn't even started the intermittent fasting piece. And so for me, the lifestyle had to change. I had to address my stress more proactively. I spent an entire year, and I probably haven't talked about this publicly. When I really felt depleted, I went from really intense physical activity to walking, just walking for an entire year because my adrenals were thrashed. I was not sleeping well. I mean, I had the wherewithal to recognize that something was amiss. But beyond that, I mean, other than crime scene periods, I can think back to a few months before I was hospitalized for my ruptured appendix. I had one hot flash while I was doing laundry. And I was like, what was that? I was like, wait a minute. Like, it
Right.
stopped me in my tracks.
Mhm.
And it didn't really happen again. So the one thing that I did experience as I got closer to menopause was if I drank alcohol, I would get hot flashes when I was sleeping.
Yeah.
So that was the clue that something related to alcohol was not agreeing with me. But I never had really severe symptoms. Thankfully, I think because I've done a very good job about balancing my blood glucose, making sure I'm managing my stress. So all the things I tell women to do, and I know you tell women to do, I really do lead by example. I really do those things, removing inflammatory foods. So I've been gluten-free for 13 years and dairy-free for 6.
Wow.
Those
Yeah.
things have made a big
Yeah.
difference for me personally, and alcohol free for 4 years. So,
Wow.
those are the things that for me have been needle movers. But in terms of symptoms, it was the really heavy periods that probably bothered me the much. Cause I remember rounding on patients in the hospital and I was like, if I start my cycle, no pad, no tampon is going to let me get through 3 or 4 hours. Like I could have doubled up and still bled through everything into my scrubs, which for any woman listening, there's nothing worse than bleeding through your clothes. It is not fun, especially not fun when you're at work and you're trying to get a job done. But I think for so many of us, each one of our stories is as unique as we are. But
Yeah.
I clued in 10 years ago that something was shifting, but no one had spoken to me about perimenopause. I was
Yeah.
literally like, I went to one of the leading medical institutions in the country and no one talked about menopause, not my GYN, not my midwife, not my friends, not my mom, not my family. So I feel like I just kind of fell off a cliff like so many people do.
Yeah, and that those symptoms for our listeners, those heavy cycles, the difficulty sleeping, that is associated with the rapid decline of progesterone. Add work stress, lifestyle stress, shift work. I mean, you're depleting
Yeah.
progesterone. So like you've got to replenish progesterone during that time. I mean, it really becomes one of the most essential nutrients. Okay, it's a hormone, but it's like essential. To me, it's as essential as air during that time, building up your adrenals,
Mhm.
empowering your body to use as much, decrease toxic burden, all those things, and then to, supplement with that progesterone because I like the term crime scene periods. You totally know what that is,
Very
right?
descriptive. I think if anyone has experienced that, like I still keep tampons and pads at my house because I just think about, God forbid someone comes to my house and they're going through what I went through at that stage. I just remember and of course, the kind of standard medical therapy is oral contraceptives, an IUD, an ablation, or, you're done having kids. This is what my
Take it
GYN
out.
said, let's just do a hysterectomy. And I was like, no, 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 and no. And so
As
that
a
has,
GYN, I apologize. I did the
yeah,
same thing early in my career till I
yeah,
figured it out differently, right?
yeah,
Like it,
yeah,
it just makes a huge, I mean, it makes such a big difference. So then you go through your hospitalization and now no periods. And so like mentally, like how was that? Like mentally, how did you feel about that? Like, okay, I'm in this transition, I'm in this menopause now,
yeah.
I've been doing all the things right. What do I do now? What did you
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing I really thought about, honestly, was I almost died when I was in the hospital. I don't say that lightly. I think I spent the first few months after I was hospitalized. So I left the hospital on March 2nd. Then I did a talk that changed the trajectory of my career and my life. And then 6 weeks after
your
my hospital,
TEDx, a big deal, like millions of views, big
um,
deal.
um,
Congratulations.
thank you. And then 10 days after that talk, 6 weeks after I was hospitalized, I had my appendix out. And I remember it was like a tremendous sense of relief because my surgeon said there's no sign of cancer, which was her concern. But she said your body had walled off your appendix. Like it really, all the things that we were doing did the right things to protect you. But you would have clearly had another episode of appendicitis. So I'd had my appendix out. And I just remember it was just this profound sense of my mortality. That was what I felt. And if I were to think back to where I was in headspace, March, April, May of 2019 was, oh my gosh, like I thought I was invincible. And it probably took a few more months before I even started thinking about the fact that I hadn't had a period, to be honest with you. But at that point, I was like, I think the ship has sailed. Like I had never gone 8, 9 months without a menstrual cycle. And I was like, I think this might be the beginning of that 12 months without a menstrual cycle. And I remember talking to my midwife and she said, you lost so much weight. I mean, I would be surprised if you got another cycle. Like what estrogen stores you had are gone. And so that began this kind of process of initially I was ashamed. I was embarrassed. I didn't want to say I was menopausal. When I hit that year mark, I remember that distinctly that I somehow felt, and I've never felt a sense of ageism, but I just remember distinctly like I've crossed over to another side.
Wow.
But now I look at it as it's a blessing. But at the time I was like, I'm not ready. This isn't when it should have happened. I mean, I think I was still kind of processing what was going on. And now I look at it as I've had 5 years without having to worry about a crime scene period. I've had 5 years of not having to worry about, do I have a tampon? Do I have a pad? Do I have any of these things? And so to me, it was then very freeing to realize that I no longer had to worry about when I was getting my cycle. How heavy was it going to be? How light was it going to be? Was it going to come back 2 weeks later? Because as you know, as you're getting closer to the end of your menstrual cycle, like your menstrual cycle history, your menstrual cycle starts to shift. Sometimes it's heavy, sometimes it's light, sometimes it comes every 2 weeks, sometimes it's going longer. And I had started seeing some changes, although I was still fairly regular. I think I was completely anovulatory. I don't think I was ovulating at all at that point. But I do think that there was this profound sense of loss, and it wasn't so much loss of my youth because I was married. I am married and have been married for a long time. But it was just re-identifying yourself. Like I'm part of a club I didn't think that I was going to be part of this early. I think that was where my mindset was. And then as I started talking to more women, especially people like yourself and other women that are leaders in this space, I started to realize like, this is kind of a cool club. Everyone started to chill out. I feel like people are less competitive. I think people tend to be nicer. I think people are, because their hormones there's not as much fluctuation day to day, week to week. I think people
You
tend to be
meet the
more.
same person every day, right?
Yes.
Like
Yes. I
you're
think
the
people are more
same person.
interesting because I feel like most of the people that I interact with, they do the inner work so that they show up differently for their followers, their subscribers, their clients, their patients, their loved ones. And so to me, it's more interesting. There's this loss of a competition because people are more grounded in who they are and what they want. And so to me, that is
I think it's
incredibly freeing.
I think it's also the sense that there's so much more value in the time we have with people we love. And so other things that maybe we've been competing for or about become less and less important.
Yeah.
And so the value of the quality of our lives becomes important. It definitely has in my life. So when did
Mhm.
you start using hormones? Like, because you knew of the research and you
Yep.
knew of the bullshit that we were presenting with the Women's Health Initiative, and you're like, "Oh, no, I know that is incorrect." So how
Yeah.
did you then
So
approach it and then like, "Oh my god, I'm using this. Do I have to use this for the rest of my life?" Like, what were your thoughts?
So I knew that I was going to do HRT. I think that between what I knew just in interacting with experts in the space, but also Lisa Mosconi's book, The XX Brain, which scared the bejeebers out of me, I was like, of course I'm going to use hormones. There's so many reasons to use hormones. It was probably the beginning of 2021. And I will admit that I did not select the right provider the first time out, but I was able to figure out for myself that using such high doses of estrogen, testosterone was not good for me because it was right around the time I had gotten a COVID vaccine that I started HRT, whether it's causality or not. I bled for 6 months. And when I got to the 6 month mark, I was like, I am fed up. So I ended that relationship and then started working with someone that was more in alignment, using transdermal estrogen, using transdermal testosterone, using oral progesterone. And I jokingly say, I will use progesterone for the rest of my life because it makes
Oh,
such
yeah.
a huge net impact on my sleep quality. So clearly it was 2021. So I hadn't been, if you look at like when my last period had been, which was like January of 2019, I didn't go too long. I waited that whole year till I was technically menopausal and then started hormones. And then it took me a bit of time to figure out the right practitioner because everyone that's listening, you and your provider may have differing opinions on, what your goals are, but I didn't want to have a cycle. That was definitely like a resounding, again, it might not have per se been directly related to the hormones. It might have also been the confounding variable of the vaccine itself. But once I became even keeled, and the way that I found for myself, I do better with a little bit more testosterone than I do estrogen. And so we've been able to fine tune the right doses for me, how frequently I'm using them. Like I use testosterone every day, I use estrogen every other day. That keeps my levels where they need to be. I use progesterone every day, except I do take, as you and I have talked about, 3 to 4. It's Friday nights. I take a break from my progesterone. But I think that for each one of us, it's really like fine tuning. Like there's dosing ranges, and then it's figuring out like the N of one, what
Right.
works best for you. If I use a little bit too much estrogen, it makes me fluffy. And so it's finding the right amount of estrogen for me that protects my brain, my bones, my heart, etc., without making me feel fluffy. And it's fascinating to me that it's taken me doing a little bit of tinkering. And thankfully, my provider lets me do that. I just disclose what I'm doing. I was like, if I use it every other day, I don't feel fluffy. If I use it every day, it's too much. And they were like, your labs look fine. It's because your labs look fine, then we'll just let you keep doing that. I was like, perfect.
Well,
But
and I think that's a really important point, that tinkering.
Mhm,
Like as you, and this is important, like when I work to empower my patients, right?
mhm,
Empower other women, it's understanding there's times you need more, there's times you need less. Listen to your body and what's beneficial when we are using creams and transdermals or vaginal, that we can,
mhm,
easily modify those dosages too. We may need more in the winter and less in the summer. I mean, like learning what you need is so critically important. So
yeah. Oh, and I
bravo
want to
for
make sure
doing
I
that.
mention I also use, and we've tinkered with plain estrogen, with testosterone, plain DHEA. Like we've been tinkering with the intravaginal products, and then obviously I use your Jolva as well because I feel like that's for me is very effective with the external part of the vulva for me personally. And we were talking before that I think some people get weird symptoms, and I've just come to find that more often than not, estrogen is sometimes the answer to weird symptoms that you're experiencing, especially genitourinary symptoms that maybe we don't want to disclose or talk about with any great kind of exposure. But I would say if you're not using intravaginal estrogen or some derivation of what I've just described, you need to be, because you
Yeah.
and I, over, I can't tell you how many septic, chronic urinary tract infections. I mean, I wasn't treating them per se because I was dealing specifically in cardiology, but there's nothing sadder than seeing a 90-year-old who's septic from a urinary tract infection from something that could have been 100% preventable by a drug that is just absorbed in the mucosa and epithelium of the vagina, as opposed to, how many of my patients were on chronic UTI prophylaxis,
Yeah,
meaning
or
they were given
daily
low dose
antibiotics.
antibiotics.
But
Yep.
I think the critical thing is like where DHEA is the safest, DHEA works all the way down to the muscle layer and converts at the intrinsic cellular layer to estrogen and testosterone. So
Mhm.
we get that benefit without risking contamination of a male partner. Plus, the focus on the vagina misses clitoris to anus, the most important real estate within which is the urethra. So oftentimes I see someone who's been on vaginal estrogen, but they're lost their glandular secretions and they have pallor, so a atrophy between the clitoris and the urethra and the vaginal opening, and it hurts, right? It hurts. They're more susceptible to urinary infections, and estrogen won't fix that because it's not working on the muscularis or the glands. DHEA and testosterone do. So fixing those things is really important. And then we talked before, estrogen can transmit to the male partner. So then you have to
And
worry about
that's,
timing. But if we
yep.
can overcome that with DHEA or with Jolva, that makes a huge difference and we feel safer. And adding in testosterone when we need it. I think all of those things, like addressing that, it's beyond the lovely experience of sex. Keeping the pelvic floor, the entire pelvic floor healthy is, I mean, it's game changing for women. I mean, how many women end up with prolapse surgery and everything else? We don't even like to think about that. We're like, bad, it's bad enough to just think about menopause. We want
Yeah.
to, figure out, okay, now changing it to transition it to really embrace this time of life. Now you are 5 years post-menopause. Now this is another like, okay, now we're post-menopause. And people like often I had a message today. People forget about us post-menopause. Please remember to talk about us. So y'all, I'm talking to you.
Well, I mean, the other thing that I would just add that I think is really cool, and I'm having a conversation with my teenager who goes off to college, and so we have to, of course, have the conversation about condoms and being conscientious about using them, and the conversation that makes him totally embarrassed. But I'm like, I would be remiss. I'm your mom, and I'm an NP. I have to say this, but the one of the things that I love about menopause, no more periods. Like no more worrying about pregnancy when you don't want a pregnancy. And so for me, that is very freeing. Obviously I've been married for 21 years. I've been with my husband for 22 years. But I was saying to him that we were outside talking to a similar group of demographics. So people who had sent their oldest off to college recently. And they were saying, gosh, it's like they're just starting their lives. Like all the things that we now don't have to worry about. They're just entering that stage in their lives where, it becomes a consideration. Like, whether you're male or female, whether you're choosing to become a parent or not become a parent at that point in time. Like those are big things to think about. And it's like you become unburdened from a lot of that when you go through menopause. It's like my fertility, I've handed in my fertility card and I'm
Mhm.
okay with that.
Mhm. I know these different transitions. So what are you looking forward to now? Share with our audience what you're looking forward to and also what you're doing so people can connect with you more.
Yeah, so I am a travel luster. So I'm always planning the next vacation. And I was saying to my husband, we've been putting off doing Asia or Australia, New Zealand until the kids are in college, because that would be a longer trip. And so I had said to my husband, I think 2026, we're going to plan like a bigger trip, a longer trip. We just have to have someone take care of the dogs, but we'll have both the kids in college and we could actually weather that. So for me, I'm always planning the next trip. Next trip with the kids, we're going to the lower Danube area. We're going to start in Budapest and end up in Istanbul. So I'm always traveling, working on a new book, which is exciting, really talking about the role of the gut microbiome, the things that are changing in women's bodies as we're navigating these transitional times in our lives. I promise it's sexier than that. It's really relevant. It's putting all these pieces together about immune function and bone health as well as detoxification, sex hormones. It is really relevant. And I think the more that our listeners and our followers can understand, the more they can advocate for themselves. So working on a new book, obviously podcast. I was just telling you as we were starting this podcast, I need to have you back on to talk about a lot of things that we were talking off air. I was like, I haven't anyone talk about some of these things. It's important for people just to be aware. So great to connect with me on social media. Follow me off my website, which is www.cynthiathurlow.com. I've got an amazing podcast, and Dr. Anna's been a guest multiple times. And then we're coming out with a new product line. Obviously, creatine has been a huge, huge, huge benefit, not just for muscle strength, but bone, brain health, etc. Really, really integral. Also has some elements of sleep architecture. We're coming out with a whole new product line that should be out this fall, and we're really excited about that.
That is awesome. And you guys, though, you can connect also with Cynthia at dranna.com/Cynthia. And I have used her carnitine and her inositol product, have loved them. But it's awesome to listen to her 'cause she has real life conversations. And just like today, it's been awesome to have you, Cynthia, on the Girlfriend Doctor Show. Always enjoy talking with
Yes,
you. And this has been a really fun, intimate conversation. I want to thank you so much too for sharing so personally.
absolutely. Looking forward to seeing you in a couple weeks.
I look forward to it too. All right, everyone. Thank you again, Cynthia, for being here on the show. We look forward to continuing. Again, we'll be back and forth on each other's show in the
Yep.
future. So I look forward to those conversations as well. So I thank you so much for being here. And please let me know what you want to hear about, or what are you experiencing? How are you going to celebrate menopause? I appreciate you following and rating the Girlfriend Doctor Show, the podcast, wherever you are listening. And be sure to subscribe on YouTube where you can see the full videos. Thank you and God bless. Till next time, this is Dr. Anna Cabeca.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Girlfriend Doctor podcast. Check out all the links below for more.